I spent a fair bit of time talking about the flood, which is a very common mythological story, the idea that there is a flood and that the creator of everything determines that from time to time to wipe things out. And that's appropriately read as a description of the conditions of existence. No matter who you are, as you walk through life, you're going to be confronted by catastrophes that have the possibility of washing you away. And you need to know how to conduct yourself in order to prevail when that happens. I mean, that can happen to you personally. You can get very ill, or it can happen to you in your family when a family member breaks down or dies or has something terrible happen to them, or there's an economic catastrophe in your family. And it can happen socially. And not only can it happen, it will happen. And the injunction to Noah, for example, or the description of Noah, because he's the person that builds an ark, is that he walks with God. And that means that he has his moral house in order, and that his generations are perfect, which means that he has his family in order. And what that means is that when the crisis comes, he's prepared to deal with it and can prevail. And that's what people need to know. They need to know how to do that, because the crisis is always coming. That's why the apocalypse, the idea of the apocalypse and the end of the world, is also archetypal. It's because our worlds come to an end continually in small ways and sometimes in large ways. And so, in some sense, it's necessary to be constantly preparing for the apocalypse, because you're going to go through experiences in your life that will throw you for a loop and force you to either radically change or to fail and perhaps to die. So those experiences in life where the fundamental constants that keep you oriented shift, and then you fall into the unknown. That's the underworld of mythology. You fall into the unknown and into the underworld, and part of that underworld can be hell. Now, hell is the part of the underworld that emerges when you're embittered by your failure and you turn towards the desire to destroy. And everyone who thinks about this can appreciate that, because most people, at least if they reflect on their own experience, can understand full well the negative psychological consequences of falling flat on your face. It's not only that you fail, it's that you become bitter and turn against the world. That's a trip to hell for all intents and purposes. The fundamentalist types tend to read those things very concretely and to only project that out into an afterlife, say, or a purely spiritual world. And I'm not making any claims at the moment about metaphysics or post-life existence. I'm saying that these descriptions pertain to psychological conditions that are always around us right here and now, and that the mythological landscape is the landscape of human experience. It's not the objective world. And the landscape of human experience and the objective world aren't the same thing. There's no pain. Pain is not an objective thing. It's part of the subjective world of human experience, but its reality is undeniable from an experiential perspective. So our materialist outlook doesn't do a good job of orienting us in the world, because it doesn't tell us how to behave, and it can't. It's the famous conundrum put forward by David Hume, which is you can't derive an ought from an is, which means no matter how much factual information you extract from the world, you're not going to derive from that an unerring guide to how you should act. And so you might say, well, there's an endless number of answers to the question how you should act, but that's not helpful, because all that does is disorient you. You want to push yourself out against the world in as many ways as you can, because that forces you to develop, and there's that's partly because as you push yourself out against the world and learn new things, you become more and more informed, right, by the information that you're generating in your active encounter with the world. But also we know that when you put yourself in new situations, new genes turn on in your nervous system and they code for new proteins. And so you exist a lot in potential, and you need to actualize that potential in order to become all that you need to be in order to prevail in the world. And the way that you do that is by pushing yourself out against new unknown things and forcing your own transformation in the face of those challenges. And the idea is that if you do that, let's say religiously, then you can turn yourself into a character that has enough power and strength to prevail in the tragic conditions of life without becoming embittered and cruel and malevolent. And I mean, again, to me, the longer I study this, I suppose the more self-evident it seems to me. Life is very difficult. It will challenge you to your core. you need to be able to withstand that challenge, or you'll warp and deteriorate. How do you develop yourself to withstand that challenge? You take on responsibilities and challenges voluntarily and strengthen yourself. How else could you possibly do it? I mean, you could hide, but there's no hiding. You can't hide from illness and death. You can't hide from loneliness or pain. It's not possible. And if you retreat, then the things that chase you just grow larger. So you have to put yourself together. And you do that by seeing what's right in front of you, regardless of whether or not you like it, and encouraging yourself to master what you see voluntarily, and to extend yourself and to stretch yourself out constantly. And you do that with your eyes open, and you do that with your speech and thinking carefully monitored and regulated, so that you don't corrupt yourself with unnecessary ignorance and delusion, because that will just hurt you when the crisis comes.
So this is why and then it goes back to why these meta-narratives, these archetypes exist. They instruct us on how to do just that, right? How to face chaos, how to face tragedy, because they provide examples. They set the pattern.
Yeah, they set
right.
the pattern. Yeah, and the issue is, how do you manifest the pattern in your own life? That's the crucial issue, is how do you realize the archetype in your own life? And you do that in part by accepting the struggles of your being, or perhaps even welcoming them, and subjugating yourself to them, and opening yourself up to the possibility of radical transformation in the face of your errors and faults. That's humility, I suppose. You're not all that you could be. Well, you might say, well, why does that matter? Well, it's easy to answer that. If you're not all that you can be, you will suffer more than you have to, and so will the people around you. And you might say, well, I don't care about that. It's like, well, that's unlikely, because virtually everyone cares about their own pain. But even if you have got to the point where you don't care about that, that's certainly nothing to be happy about or proud of. It's a catastrophe.
You have to become who you are, right? According to Pindar, quoted by Nietzsche.
Well, that's associated with Jung's idea of the self, is that, and one of the ways to understand that, because it seems like a very strange pronouncement, is that you are what you are, but you're also what you could be, which is a strange thing, right? And that's no more than to say that you are characterized by an indefinite amount of potential. So you are what you are, and you are the potential that you are. And that's a very paradoxical statement, because it's not obvious how you can be something that's potential, because potential isn't being, it's the possibility of becoming. But be that as it may, we're stuck with it. It's a paradox, but we're stuck with it. The goal of authenticity from an existential perspective is to pursue that which you could be, so that you can flesh yourself out, so you can burn off what about you is dead and outdated, and so that you can allow what could be to come to life. And the deep archetypal idea is that to the degree that you do that, you redeem yourself and you redeem the world around you. And I believe that that's, again, I don't think that that's metaphysics. It seems to be the most practical of truths. You can be afraid, but you can't stop.
Yeah.
That's the thing, because the fear is justifiable, but it's not, that doesn't make it a sufficient reason to retreat and stop. There's no retreat in life. That's the thing. There might be periods where you can pull back and rest, but because we're surrounded by the unknown and the unexpected, and because we're characterized by the consequences of our ultimate ignorance, and because we're finite, there's no stepping back.